Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was born on the 21st of July, 1899, and he died on the 2nd of July, 1961. One of the things that captivates me about Ernest Hemingway is that his life was way more interesting and exciting than any of his books. And that's not something that usually happens. So when I present his life, and you're going to see this narrative line, if it were written in a novel, you would say, no, that's a stretch. That doesn't really happen. Well, actually, it did happen. In addition, Ernest Hemingway is an author that I have not studied, which doesn't mean I have not read. I have read Ernest Hemingway, and intentionally, I have tried to stay away from scholar and academic studies. Why? Because my experience of Ernest Hemingway was so rich and so profound that I don't want it to be influenced or contaminated or infected or tainted with any other opinion. It's just a personal choice, right? I'm sure that if I delve into some scholarly digested articles on Ernest Hemingway, I'm gonna find things that I don't know. But at the same time, I want my experience of Hemingway to be, let's call it, chemically pure. I want to let Ernest Hemingway speak to me in his own way. And I want to let Ernest Hemingway resonate within me in that particular way. He was raised in Oak Park, Illinois, and his father was a medical doctor. His mother was a musician. He didn't like his name, Ernest, because it reminded him of the hero of The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. So he didn't like that. Additionally, his mother, being a musician, forced him to play the cello, and he didn't like it. He had a very tough relationship with his cello training, but he acknowledges that that helped him with the contrapunct. And that's something that you can see in his novels. He began working as a journalist for the Kansas City Star. And in 1918, he volunteered during World War I to be an ambulance driver in Italy. So belonging to the Red Cross as a volunteer, he ended up being very badly injured. He was very badly injured with mortar fire. Nevertheless, he assisted soldiers and he received a Medal of Bravery. Remembering this, he wrote, "When you go to war as a boy, you have great illusion of immortality. Other people get killed, not you. Then, when you are badly wounded the first time, you lose that illusion and you know it can happen to you." He would also participate in World War II, but I think, I am not entirely sure, in one of his autobiographic accounts, Ernest Hemingway recalls how he received a Silver Medal of Bravery. And he put it along with all the pieces of iron and metal that they had extracted from his leg. While he was recovering from his injuries, he fell in love with a nurse, Agnes von Kurowski, and he proposed. And he went back to America to prepare everything for his newly wedded life, only to receive a letter from her informing him that she was engaged to an Italian officer. So he was completely devastated. And after this, I don't think he ever recovered from that trauma, and he would repeat this pattern. I don't think I'm being a spoiler if I tell you that he would get married 4 times. So he repeated that pattern. For example, in 1921, he married Hadley Richardson. He was hired by the Toronto Star, and he went to live with her to Paris, where he befriended great writers like James Joyce and Gertrude Stein, and also some artists like Pablo Picasso and Miro. While he was stationed in Paris, he was also sent to cover the Greek-Turkish War. And in 1923, he visited Spain. He was thrilled with the Spanish folklore, with bullfights, with corridas, and this inspired his first novel, The Sun Also Rises, in 1926. 1926. The Sun Also Rises. And it also inspired another novel whose title is Death in the Afternoon, 1929. In 1927, he divorced Hadley and he married Pauline Pfeiffer. She was a Catholic, so Ernest Hemingway converted to Catholicism. The year after that, he went to live to Kansas City, and it was there where his son Patrick was born. Pauline, his then wife, had a very difficult delivery, and this inspired the ending of his novel A Farewell to Arms. Although I personally think that the plot is inspired in his own experience during World War I, except for the ending. Around 1929, his father committed suicide, and Ernest Hemingway was devastated. Actually, to be more precise, his father committed suicide due to financial difficulties. And Ernest Hemingway had just received a large sum of money, and he was about to communicate to his father that he had received this money and that he shouldn't worry anymore, when he found out that his father had committed suicide. Ernest Hemingway was devastated and foretold, he foretold, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, and he said, I will go the same way. Oh, no. And he did. 1930, he went hunting to Wyoming. He hunted grizzly bears, elk, deer, and had a car accident that paralyzed his hand for at least 1 year. So he couldn't continue riding for a while. In 1933, he went on a safari trip to East Africa, and this travel inspired two of his great novels, Snows of Kilimanjaro and Green Hills of Africa, besides some short stories. While he was in this safari, he contracted dysentery and had to be evacuated by plane. In 1937, he started working for the NANA, North American Newspaper Alliance, and he covered the Spanish Civil War. Something he also had in common with George Orwell. George Orwell was a volunteer for the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War, and Octavio Paz as well. Something remarkable is that most intellectuals were on the Republican side. And while military victories were all for the nationalists' band, for the band of the nationalists, the Republicans had practically all of the intellectual battles won. He covered, for example, the Battle of Ebro in 1938. In 1940, his relationship with, actually, even before, 1939, his relationship with Pauline Pfeiffer started to unravel, and at the same time, he also fell in love with Martha Gellhorn, so he married her in 1940. They moved to Havana, Cuba, and his relationship with Martha Gellhorn inspired For Whom the Bells Toll, which is set in precisely during the Spanish Civil War. With this novel, he was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, and this reinvigorated his literary career. During World War II, he met Mary Welsh, and he would eventually divorce Martha and marry her. You can read in some biographies of Ernest Hemingway that he was present in the Normandy landing, in the D-Day. Yes, but that's a very qualified claim, because back then he was carried like a precious cargo. So he was there, but don't imagine that he was on the front line. During World War I, he was among the crossfires, but in World War II, his role and his position was a lot more distant from all the danger and the action, although eventually he would also take an active part in some troops, but it was a lot more moderate than what his experience had been during World War I. Also, during this time, he had a car accident that took him to the hospital, and after the war ended, he had another car accident. In this other car accident, his knee got completely smashed, and Patrick, his son, and Mary both suffered serious injuries. 1948, he went to Venice, Italy, and he fell in love with the 19-year-old Adriana Ivanich. Strangely, this didn't end his marriage with Mary, at least not for now. His affair with, or his romance with Adriana Ivanich inspired the novel Across the River and Into the Trees. Across the River and Into the Trees, which was published in 1950. Critical reception of this novel was very harsh. So the novel was torn to pieces, and Ernest Hemingway was furious about the literary criticism his novel had received. What was Ernest Hemingway's reaction? He was very angry, but he distilled all his passion into The Old Man and the Sea. And in 8 weeks, he wrote this novel, saying to himself, this is as good as I can write. I'm writing to the best of my ability. He had the novel published in 1952, and he won the Pulitzer Prize. After he won the Pulitzer Prize and he was renowned and famous, he went on another safari trip to Africa, where he had 2 successive plane crashes. Yes. And by the way, it's not like a plane crash is very dangerous. It can kill you. It's not like in action movies, because in action movies, that's how planes land. They crash and they land, and everyone is safe. No. In real life, a plane crash can be deadly. So he hit the plane hit a pole, and Mary broke 2 ribs, and Ernest suffered serious burns and serious head injuries. So after the plane crash, they had to rush him with another plane to a hospital, and while this other plane was taking off, it exploded.
No.
If I had written that in a fiction story, you would say, that's too much. But it actually happened. So now you see why I'm saying that his life is way more intense than any of his novels. Not only that, while he was still recovering, so he was practically paralyzed, a bushfire broke out, and he suffered second-degree burns from that bushfire. A lot of journalists started writing his obituary. They didn't expect him to live through all those injuries. And probably the number of obituaries that were written just to be published the day after Ernest Hemingway would die inspired or moved the Academy to award the Nobel Prize to Ernest Hemingway. So he was awarded with Nobel Prize in 1954, and then he mocked the journalists, saying, you thought I would die, but he didn't die. I don't have a very precise account of this, but to begin with, I've mentioned that Ernest Hemingway fell in love with Spanish folklore. He was not fluent in Spanish, but he could understand it very well, and he could communicate. And he admired Spanish novelists, especially Pío Baroja. So, according to some accounts, after he received the Nobel Prize, and by the way, dates match, he could have gone to Spain, and he assisted Pío Baroja on his deathbed. 1956, I find this little, I don't find this very credible, but what is credible in Ernest Hemingway's life? 1956, he was reminded, or he remembered, that in 1928 he had left a trunk with notebooks in the Ritz Hotel in Paris. So he went and retrieved the trunk full of notebooks, and with that material he worked on The Movable Feast. Again, I don't find this very credible. Like, it's almost 3 decades afterwards. He remembers, oh yeah, I left my notebooks in that hotel somewhere in Paris when I was living there. So now I'm gonna go retrieve it, and I'm gonna use that material to publish a novel. But in the end, what is credible in Ernest Hemingway's life? So it might just as well be this way. 1960, he left Cuba for good. And apparently in good terms with Castro. Actually, if you Google Ernest Hemingway and Castro, you will find photographs of the two of them. And they appear to be in good terms. He was not favorable to the regime, but what was he favorable to, right? And apparently he left in good terms with the Cuban government. And he came back to America, where he started suffering from severe depression, and he ended his life. He shot himself. His wife at first tried to deliver the news as if it had been an accident, but it's almost sure, and at this point everybody agrees that he shot himself. It was not an accident. Now, let me now delve into The Old Man and the Sea. I've spoken about his life, and it's an intense life. Once I had a literature professor who said, Ernest Hemingway stories are not great stories. I agree, you know? If you want to find an intriguing plot, and you want to find lots of plot twists and suspense and adventure, you are definitely going to be disappointed. However, the fact that Ernest Hemingway's stories are not great stories, that doesn't mean his books are not great books. So the thing I love about Ernest Hemingway is what has been named the iceberg theory. There's a symbolic structure that operates underneath, and sometimes very, very deeply underneath the surface. That symbolic structure is out of sight. And when you read the novel at a plain surface level, you will find a very, very plain line. Actually, what novel by Ernest Hemingway cannot be summarized in less than a paragraph? Let me think. The Sun Also Rises. So he's in Paris, they go to Spain, they return to Paris. The end. Okay, yeah, someone gets killed on the way, but the plot is not very intense. The Old Man and the Sea. He hasn't got a fish, he catches a fish, the sharks eat the fish, and he returns. So any novel by Ernest Hemingway can be summarized in less than a paragraph. But when you delve into it, and its symbolism, and its meaning, and especially the experiences it conveys, you find something wonderful, you find something amazing, you find something thrilling. Additionally, the influence of Ernest Hemingway is undeniable, not only in English literature, but in English prose. English prose. So, whether you are writing journalism, whether you are writing a scientific article, whether you are writing psychology, about psychology, whether you are writing about the stock market, you are undeniably influenced by Ernest Hemingway. What am I referring to? His short sentences. In nowadays English, there's hardly any subordination. In Ernest Hemingway's writings, 70% of his sentences are short sentences, meaning there's no subordination. And the remaining 30%, maybe there's just one subordination. So subordination in English is rare. And this is something we owe to Ernest Hemingway. So he's like an watershed in the history of English as a language. After Ernest Hemingway, there's no such thing as long sentences in English. Compare Ernest Hemingway's style with that of Herman Melville. Those long sentences, those baroque sentences, were common, and by the way, it's not impossible to understand it. You can listen and you can still read to Moby Dick because it was very well written, but nobody writes like Herman Melville anymore. Now, writing style has veered toward that of Ernest Hemingway. In him, we also see a strong reaction against 19th century writers. So, remember that a common pattern of most 20th century writers is their reaction against the 19th century. We find that very profoundly in Ernest Hemingway. And in some way or another, you find that symbolism, which can also be called a kind of escape. How is Ernest Hemingway escaping? He's escaping to the folklore of Spain. He's escaping to the safari in Africa. He's escaping to the North American West. So those are new fields that detach him from that everyday life and from the turmoil of contemporary society. What do I have to say about The Old Man and the Sea? A lot. But I'll try to be very, very synthetic. The Old Man and the Sea. I've already stated what the plot is. However, what's the meaning? There can be many meanings. And I'm sure you can even come up with new meanings. But let me give you a few hints. He had gone 84 days now without taking a fish. Is this a symbol of a literary career? Meaning, I'm a writer. I have no inspiration. I've gone 84 days without having a good idea. I cannot even write a single line that I find inspiring. So I have to dive and I have to go into the depths of what is inside me and struggle to get out that fish. And I bring out that fish, let's say, from the depths of my subconscious. And I present that for literary criticism, which tears it to pieces. Just like the sharks destroyed the fish he had struggled so much to get. It can also be seen as a metaphor of life. I wish I had the boy. I wish the boy was here. He repeats that over and over again, at least 5 times and maybe more. Doesn't it speak to us about loneliness? How in life, many of our decisions we have to confront in loneliness. Or, I wish the boy was here. I wish I had the boy. Could that be a longing for childhood and for innocence? In life's struggle, he tried not to think, but to endure. I'm quoting. I wish I could see him. I wish I could see him only once to know what I have against me. So in this struggle of life, sometimes we don't know what we have against us. We are grappling with a mystery. And the fish is the symbol of life that we are struggling against, that more often than not, we cannot fully get, we cannot fully grasp, we cannot fathom. The wounds he endured can be a symbol of the wounds life inflicts on us. But he also says the dark water of the true Gulf is the greatest healer there is. Life can also be very healing, and we can find it restoring. But man is not made for defeat, he said, and man can be destroyed, but not defeated. That's a life lesson, I think. Have you seen this novel as a love story? Is this a romantic novel? Yes, no? He's lonely. And during the night, 2 porpoises came around the boat, and he could hear them rolling and blowing. He could tell the difference between the blowing noise of the male and that of the female, which was like sighing. So he's alone, while the porpoises have their mates. He recalls, let me read it from the novel. He remembered the time he had hooked one of a pair of marlin. The male fish always left the female fish feet first, and the hooked fish, the female, made a wild, panic-stricken, despairing fight that soon exhausted her. That's also a powerful lesson about female psychology. And then, while the old man was cleaning the lines, and preparing the harpoon, the male fish jumped high into the air beside the boat to see where the female was, and then went down deep. That was the saddest thing I ever saw, the old man thought. But it's not only an external reference about love. Remember that in the beginning it said of him, his hands had deep creased scars from handling heavy fish on the cords, but none of these scars were fresh. They were as old as erosions in a fishless desert. Think of the scars of love. But that love had already turned into a scar. None of those scars were fresh. They were as old as erosions in a fishless desert. What is said about his wife? She was dead. She had a photo of her, but he had removed the photo and he had piled it underneath his shirts. So there's no longing. There are no dreams. There are no expectations. He's not in the quest of love. But then he goes out and he exposes himself again and he's vulnerable again. And there's the emotion, and there's the thrill, and there's a new discovery. Then he felt the gentle touch on the line and was happy. It was only his turn, he said. He'll take it. He was happy feeling the gentle pulling and then felt something hard and unbelievably heavy. Imagine a man that is trying to attract the attention of a woman. Doesn't it seem pretty much like the fish catching the line? And he's hopeful that the fish is going to get the line. Think of what you are doing. You must do nothing stupid. Think of what you are doing. You must do nothing stupid. And it's that perfect balance where you have to pull, but you cannot pull too strong because then the line will break. But you cannot let it loose. And there's also that mystery. What is the other part up to? I wish I could see him. I wish I could see him only once to know what I have against me. Never had I such a strong fish, nor one who acted so strangely. I mustn't try for the head. I must get the heart. He knew that if he couldn't slow the fish with a steady pressure, the fish could take out all the line and break it. He also says, I wish I could show him what sort of man I am. And the fish starts swimming northwards. He's driving him away from his comfort zone. Then, after he catches the fish, it lasts only a short time. And this is Ernest Hemingway's experience in love. Once he catches the fish, the thrill lasts only for a few days, maybe only for a few minutes. Then he's disappointed. He could see the fish, and he had only to look at his hands and feel his back against the stern to know that this had truly happened and was not a dream. He did not like to look at the fish anymore after the sharks bit the fish. He did not like to look at the fish anymore since he had been mutilated. When the fish had been hit, it was as though he himself were hit. It was too good to last, he thought. I wish it had been a dream now. There are a few more references regarding love, but let me just finish with this. Did you find Christ? No? It was noon when I hugged him. Could this be a symbol of the passion of Christ? Because remember also that he was accounted for death. He was 3 days unaccounted for. Nobody knew about him, and they thought he was dead for 3 days. Remember the wounds. Where was he wounded? On his hands and in his chest. That reminds us also of the passion of Christ. Think of his thirst. His mouth was too dry to speak, but he could not reach out for the water, not now. He unstepped the mast after he comes back. He unstepped the mast and furled the sail and tied it. What is a mast? It's the beam that goes on a ship. And how does it look when you unstep it? It looks like a cross. And what did he do with the mast? He carried it uphill. He unstepped the mast and furled the sail and tied it. Then he shouldered the mast and started to climb. It was then he knew the depth of his tiredness. He stopped for a moment and looked back. He started to climb again, and at the top he fell and lay for some time with the mast across his shoulder. He tried to get up, but it was too difficult, and he sat there with the mast on his shoulder and looked at the road. It's a very pessimistic view on redemption, because all of his effort, all of his suffering was to catch a fish that the enemy tears to pieces, and he returns only with a skeleton. There are a few other symbols, for example, a symbol of old age, and how an old man senses his strengths are faulty. He's reluctant to give in. There's also the symbol of nature. A man who knows that the fish, the turtles, the porpoise, the stars, and the moon are all my brethren. There's also the symbolism of popular wisdom. Like, for example, I am clear enough in the head, he thought, too clear. I am as clear as the stars that are my brothers. It is silly not to hope, he thought. Besides, I believe it is a sin. Do not think about this, he thought. There are enough problems without sin. Also, I have no understanding of it. So, that popular wisdom that doesn't delve into minute details, but has a general grip on reality, and he knows that he doesn't know. Anyway, I think that I have opened a new outlook on the novel, and I'm sure you can find many other symbols, and I hope you enjoy the reading of this novel. Thank you.